Okay, welcome to this module. This is where we're going to talk about this thing called a balance sheet. And so, as it would imply, balance means that there's something that has to kind of level out, that has to be equal with one another. Okay, so that's what a balance sheet is. It means we're going to list out some stuff, and that stuff has to balance. So let's go through what those two things are. If you want to think of it this way, it's what the company owns and what the company owes. Think about those two things on sitting on this scale that we're trying to weigh out and make sure that they are balanced completely. Actually, accounting books will make it such that this stuff has to balance out, and this will become clear as we go through this. Let's go through, well, what do we mean exactly when I say what the company owns? Well, you can probably guess it's stuff like this: equipment, building, inventory, cash, some of these things I've already mentioned. These are all going to be things that the company currently owns and has access to. So now let's talk about what the company owes. And the company owes two things. It owes debt and also owes the owner. So let's talk about the debt for a moment. That's just simple things. As you can imagine, it's the bank loan, it's the credit card, but that is part one. Part two is what the company owes the owner. Okay, that is the other part of the ownership part, or what the company owes. So we put these two things together: owns and owes. Okay, and if we were to more formalize these terms to make it some more accounting terminology to add to this, we're going to call this stuff over here, what the company owns, as assets. And the stuff that the company owes, there's two things. Remember I talked about, one is liabilities, and the other thing is called equity, or the owner's stake. Now, when we talk about balance at the very beginning, we said that assets, well, these two things have to line up. So assets equals liabilities plus equity. Okay, those two things have to be in order. So whatever the total value of assets is, has to be the total value of whatever it is when you add up the liabilities and the equity. Again, what the company owes and what owes the owner. Okay. So let's just use some simple math to kind of work through this so you can kind of see why it's important for balance sheet. So we'll start off first by calculating the assets. So the assets of the company is at 100,000. Okay. Second thing we go calculate is the liabilities are 75,000. Remember, I said these two things have to balance. So at the bottom, they have to equal, in this case, 100,000 each. So what does that mean the equity number has to be in this case? Well, it's 25,000. So 75,000 plus 25,000 equals 100,000. 100,000, 100,000. That is what is in balance. What if we did something other than this? Well, let's just use another example. Let's just say, again, the assets are 100, but the liabilities are 130, much higher than that example before is 75. Now the equity, in order to make this balance, the equity has to be negative 30. So this means is that the owner has a business that's underwater. Imagine this. Imagine if you bought a car. Let's just say you bought a $130,000 car, brand new, and you did it finance 100%, and then you drove it off the lot, and the very next day you wanted to go sell it, and you have it now. It was a new car when you bought it, but now it's a used car, and now you want to turn around and sell it. Well, you could only get $100,000 for this used car, even though you just bought it yesterday. It's now, well, it's a used car, so it went down in value. So now that means you are $30,000 underwater. Same thing with the business. When the assets are, when you add all up, are at one number, but the liabilities are higher than that number, then that means that company is underwater. It means that it's not in a very good spot. It doesn't mean that company is doomed forever, but I mean, it does mean that there's a problem that needs to be taken care of. This is a weak balance sheet. It means like things are not really going well. Let's flip it the other direction. What if the assets, again, 100,000, but the liabilities only tally for 40,000? That means the equity is 60,000. That means that things are better than at that very beginning example. So whenever we're figuring up a balance sheet for an owner, the main thing we're trying to get to is, what is it when we look at assets, liabilities, what is it pointing to when it comes to the equity? Because the owner wants to know, how well is this company doing? And if over time, if we start to run a balance sheet, and again, a balance sheet is just kind of a snapshot of time. It just kind of says, how are we doing today? Well, if you run the balance sheet today and you run it next month and the month after that and the month after that, if we're seeing that the equity is going up, well, that's a good thing if you're the owner. because it means that the value of the company is going up. It means it's a strong company. If conversely it's going down, well, there would be cause for concern for the owner because they don't want a company that keeps losing and losing its value and becoming more and more weak. So this is when it comes to balance sheets, how this whole thing works out. So let's go back to the very beginning again. We talked about revenue, expenses, profit. Then we just talked about balance sheet and balance sheet changes that can happen. So what happens now with the company? The owner decides we're going to take some of the cash and we're going to actually go out and buy assets. That's going to be money moving out of the company. Now, not just paying for expenses. The expenses are up here. This is stuff you just kind of consume, like electricity and rent and just different consumables, office supplies. But when you go buy an asset, it's when you're buying something big, something substantial, something like, let's just say, a piece of equipment. That's where you're taking cash and you're buying equipment. Okay, but that is still cash moving out of the company. What if they decide to pay off the loan or make accelerated loan payments or any kind of loan payment? That's still money moving out of the company. Now, the interest you pay on that loan, that is an expense, but the actual principal of the loan, that is just taking one asset, cash, and paying down a liability. So you're paying down loan. Again, it's money moving out of the company, but it's going to create a better balance sheet as time goes on. There's another way of money moving into the company from on the balance sheet side. What if we sell that, say, piece of equipment, sell an asset? That would actually be taking a piece of equipment and converting it into cash and moving it onto the balance sheet. Or say we go to the bank and take out a loan. Now that's money moving into the company. It does create, of course, a liability, but we are taking money and now moving it into the company. Again, we're talking about this whole presentation, all these modules is about cash flow and understanding how the cash situation in the business and how it's working. And by knowing how things kind of move when it comes to the balance sheet is going to be important in kind of knowing the overall structure of the business. So now we go through this whole thing. We've talked about balance sheet. We get to this last step, and it's called free cash flow. And that is going to be the subject of the next module.